Hey folks, I'm Mariam, also known as Lady Mariam, if you want to check out my social meds. And this is my segment where credit is due for hard DNA. Is there a lizard walking upstairs and running into my recording? Shh, Mia, darling, shh. Is there a contemporary artistic challenge as great and as aspirational as filmmaking? Perhaps. But it doesn't make it easy. And that's why we're here today, to honestly talk about the curveballs thrown at us during the filmmaking process and how the greats among us managed to knock them out of the park anyway.
I feel like in some interviews when I'm not supposed to, I end up being brutally honest anyway. So it's a little refreshing to have somebody be like, oh yeah, let's do that. You ask it, I'll tell it.
Today's guest is Cody Calahan, director of films like The Oak Room, Let Her Out, and the film we're discussing today, Vicious Fun. The film is a horror comedy set in the 1980s and is about Joel, a young film critic who wakes up in a bar after having passed out and accidentally finds himself in the middle of a self-help group for serial killers. Can he convince them he's one of them, or will he slip up and become their next victim? Well, you'll have to see for yourself. So, where did it all begin? Arguably, it began the moment the funding was in place.
The start of it was really intense because I had just finished another movie and I was in post when we solidified financing for Vicious Fun, which meant that my last day on post, I'd have 1 week off before we started shooting.
This meant prepping for Vicious Fun while still in the post-production phase of another movie. Cody said it was actually the most unprepared he had ever gone into a film.
Yeah, the get-go was a tough start, to say the least.
However, he adds that it did influence his mindset in a positive way, because he felt more of a need to stay on his toes, which benefited the overall production.
I like to be off my guard. Like, that's why I feel like every kind of movie I do, I try to do something different. I feel like if I feel like a fish out of water, that's when I really get creative.
He goes on to explain how his experience on different types of films have really taught him how unfamiliar elements to a production truly bring out the creativity in him. So let's dive into it. How did production go, Cody?
We destroyed a car by accident.
Come again?
It was just like a simple stunt, and we blew out the front window on one of the test runs, which are really expensive to fix on 1980s cars because they don't make the windshields anymore. So that was something that we learned. For all the filmmakers out there that are making low budget independent stuff, be very careful with antique cars.
Sounds like a big deal.
We had already shot the car, so we had to go back and swap out the car and reshoot some stuff. That added a day of shooting.
Phew! Jokes aside, with a tight 22-day schedule, an extra day can really affect the production. Speaking of tight schedule, Cody spoke about one scene in particular that had to be done quite quickly, because they only had actor David Koechner for a limited time during production.
I only had David Koechner for a certain amount of days, so I had to shoot the scene with everybody sitting around, like the support group scene. I had to shoot I think it was about 15 pages in 3 days.
That's insane. Knowing it can take up to 3 days to film a short film that's under 10 minutes long, imagine filming 15 minutes of intricate movie scene with the pressures of time management in the same time.
That was pretty intense with gore and kills and stuff like that.
Speaking of the complex nuances of the scene, something that's very striking about the set is its use of color and lighting. This is, in fact, something that the crew put a lot of thought into, trying to come up with something a little experimental.
There was a lot of experimenting with old lighting. It's we've got flickering neon signs and lighting from the 70s.
But a few of their choices were definitely a little more daring, shall we say? Some of the neon lights that they used were actually ones that you would usually use when lighting up a blue screen.
So they have this crazy intense glow, like almost more than neon.
Only a couple days into the shoot did they realize that the red cam that they were using took the light in a weird way.
About halfway through shooting, we had to switch out some of the lights because we were worried that it was actually like burning the pixels on the red, and it was actually going to mess up the image.
But luckily their post house helped fix those and it didn't affect the final results of the film. Now let's look at the locations, because location scouting tends to be a big one when it comes to indie filmmaking.
We scouted forever trying to find a restaurant that would work, and there was always, like, we found some that were incredible but too small. The ceilings were too low, we couldn't get the camera back far enough. There was always something. So that Chinese food restaurant, we built it. That's all in studio, and the kitchen at the back, that's in studio, and the police station, that's a standing set, and the hospital's a standing set. The only real locations besides the exteriors are like actually no, even Joel's apartment at the beginning, that's a set too. The motel is real.
Now, we had spoken a lot about challenges, but I wanted to know from Cody if there were any surprises that caught him off guard in a more positive way. I knew there had been quite a bit of ad-libbing, which really contributed to the comedy of the film. Evan Marsh, for example, who played the protagonist, knocks out a killer line about mustaches, but I'm not going to spoil it in case you haven't seen the film. But I asked Cody if there were any other additional anecdotes that he wanted to share with us.
I remember one, Christopher Bowman, who plays one of the cops, he gets, like, one of the scenes, he gets up and he's walking towards the door, and Bob stops him and says, the only way we're not finishing this bottle of booze with you is if you drop dead. And I can't even remember now what was in the script. I don't think that there's a line. I think he just leaves. But Chris stopped and he turns back and he has this line about his stepdaughter, which is so grounded and like sentimental and like heartfelt. I've never seen, the whole crew fell apart, laughed so hard. And it's just like little moments like that where I was like, where did that come from? He's like, I don't know. He's like, I was just like, I felt like I was caught on the spot and it just came out. And it's just, I don't know. There's tons of moments like that. And I'm of course I can't remember them all, but the whole set had that vibe of best idea wins.
Sticking with the actors, if you've seen the movie, then you know that the serial killer characters are actually quite colorful. And again, when we spoke about it, I realized pretty quickly that it had a lot to do with the method of preparing them. Cody explained that they had spent a lot of time speaking about the individual characters because he wanted them to feel to the audience like they deserved their own movie. He was explaining that if villains didn't feel like there was a myth around them or they were legends in their own right, the whole movie would feel like one big gimmick. And there were gimmicks in the film, but they were intentional. So to make these characters more solid, it was a lot about giving them their own backstories.
One of the things I remember doing for Julian Richings, who plays Fritz, I was like, Fritz takes notes on everything. He's just like one of those guys that documents everything. So I gave him a notebook like 2 or 3 months before shooting. And I said, this is the Fritz book, and start writing in it. And I remember the first day of shooting with him, he gave me the notebook and I was going through it. It was just amazing to feel how rich he had already made this character, and sort of to use that and kind of go off that. And I made sure I kind of did something like that for everybody, whether it was sort of the knives for Hideo and where those came from, or, Carrie's backstory. She probably has the biggest backstory because we wrote the whole thing out as if, she could easily have a spinoff.
Moving on to post-production. There is a scene in a movie that takes place in a kitchen. It's very action-packed, if you will. There are several actions that are being completed at the same time, and originally, the scene was written so that different moments were portrayed in a very particular sequence. The problem was that they noticed during post-production that the scene was actually way too long. No matter how they edited it, it either didn't sit right or it dragged out. So Cody and his team really had to sit down, take some time, and ponder over it a little bit. And then it hit him.
Saw this really bad 80s split screen. And I was like, holy shit, let's fucking try and make this whole section a split screen. And I remember telling one of the writers, and he was like, there's no way that's going to work. He's like, split screen's so bad. I'm like, no, but it's so bad it can be good. I remember calling the editor that night and I'm like, dude, we're doing a split screen. And it was like instant reaction was like, what are you talking about? We can't do that. And I was like, no, we're doing it. We gotta try. And I remember meeting him at our edit suite, and about 3 hours into trying it, we realized we're like, holy shit, okay, this is totally going to work.
So that whole scene, as you know it, or will get to know it, was never intended to be a split screen, but it works extremely well. So, once again, the best way to learn about filmmaking is a combination of doing it and listening to those who do it really well themselves. I asked Cody if there was anything else in particular he wanted to share with the group about filmmaking before he left.
Filmmaking is like PTSD, where it's like you make a film and you don't really remember everything, and until you start talking about it, and you're like, oh God, right, that. It's just like when you start working like that, you kind of go on a weird autopilot. You've got to rely on your crew, like Jeff Mahar, who's my DOP, who's shot every movie that I've done. I lean on him quite a bit. What's amazing about him is he's an incredible cinematographer, but he's so concerned with story. He's invested on both sides of it. Like, it has to look good, but he's like, he wants to feel it. He wants to be in the scenes. A lot of times when it's like, I don't even have time to tell you where to put the camera because I got to talk to the actors. Like, he fills in, and Chad Archibald, who's the producer, is like, best bud and business partner. And again, I feel like filmmaking is about who you surround yourself with, and the stronger the people are that you surround yourself with, the better you're off. I mean, it seems obvious, but it's true.
And with that, I am officially giving credit where credit is due. Vicious Fun is a quality film that guarantees laughs. Cody, you and your team, you did a fantastic job. And if you're watching this, don't forget to make that merch that we spoke about, remember? And if you want to watch Vicious Fun, make sure to check it out on Shudder. I'm Mariam, and I will see you next time when, once again, credit is due. And before I go, just a little bonus nugget. We've got some inside information from the director himself about the future of Vicious Fun.
As Black Fawn Films, we try to push ourselves to do something different every time. And this is our first horror comedy. And if it does well enough on Shudder and enough people chat about it and enough people talk about the idea of a sequel, then we would make one.